Hello guys, welcome back to our anime moment. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Renegade Immortal episode number 190 based on novel. So let's start. Time quickly passed, spring left and winter came, and another 5 years went by. This year's winter came especially early. Before it was winter, a large amount of snow was already covering the earth. Some of the remaining dead leaves on the branches were frozen. As the cold wind blew, the withered leaves and the snow fell together. It was like a person's lifespan. Although filled with reluctance and unwillingness to leave when the cold, snowy wind comes, they couldn't help but be taken by the breeze. In these 5 years, 5 elderly people died and 3 new lives were born. It was as if the reincarnation cycle had begun to turn while people had no awareness of it. Sun Tai became even older. His house was right next to Wang Lin's. This house was bright, but it had a hint of twilight. Like a mortal who knew that his time was about to be up, he didn't like to stay inside his room. He sat in the courtyard, looking at the sky. He was accompanied by his shining memories. Wang Ping was now 10 years old, but compared to the other children in the village, he looked like he was only 7 or 8 years old. However, his little face had more color compared to 5 years ago. The 10-year-old Wang Ping was extremely handsome, and the village's residents were all fond of this well-behaved and beautiful child. Among his playmates, many of the little girls were filled with goodwill toward the carpenter's son. This big snowstorm caused the day to become very chilly. Sun Tai peacefully sat in the courtyard. He was wearing a thick coat as he looked up at the sky, and his eyes were filled with reminiscence. Beside him, Wang Ping was also wearing a thick coat and looking at the sky in a daze. "Pinger, why did you come here to visit this old man instead of accompanying your father?" Sun Tai's eyes were filled with kindness. He really did like this child from the bottom of his heart. If it wasn't for Wang Lin, who said he wouldn't let this child cultivate, he really would have taught this child everything he knew. Wang Ping pouted and said, with displeasure, "I'm not going back, Auntie Zhong is there again." Sun Tai faintly smiled and shook his head. "Child, you can rest assured, your father won't agree." Wang Ping frowned as he counted with his fingers and said, "Not necessarily. Grandpa's son, look how many times Auntie Zhong came in the last 3 years. I have been keeping count, it's a total of 12 times. 12 times, ah. Why do most of the big sisters and aunties all have their eyes on my father?" Sun Tai laughed as he looked outside the courtyard and smiled. "Don't worry about your dad. Look outside, it seems like the second daughter of the Zhu family came looking for you." Wang Ping was startled as he raised his head and looked outside the courtyard. He saw a 7 or 8-year-old little girl with a red face gradually approach. "Big brother Wang, are you here?" The girl's crisp voice came from outside the courtyard. Wang Ping frowned and shouted, "I'm not here, you should go." With that, he simply walked out from the courtyard. He didn't even look at the girl with water gathering in her eyes and ran toward his own home. Sun Tai saw this and couldn't help but laugh. The kindness in his eyes became even stronger. At this moment, Wang Lin was in a different situation from Sun Tai. He was frowning as he faced a young woman who was constantly complaining. His face was filled with a bitter smile. Wang Lin seemed to have grown slightly older during these 5 years. It was the same as when he turned into a mortal. In order to not frighten the mortals, his appearance was no longer young and he had stepped toward the middle age. The vicissitude in his eyes gave him a strange temperament even though he was only middle-aged. The young woman was very feminine. She looked at Wang Lin and earnestly said, "Brother Wang, look, Wang Ping is already 10 years old and has had a bitter life without a mother. If you don't care about yourself, then at least think about the child. The daughter of the Zhao family at the entrance of the village is a beautiful girl, and she is willing to follow you. She even promised to treat the child like he was her own. What are you dissatisfied with?" Wang Lin's bitter smile became even stronger as he helplessly said, "This matter, let's forget about it." The young woman didn't give up and continued, Brother Wang, why must you be like this? I know you never got married again because you loved Ping Er's mother. However, you still have to live your life. When I saw you come here 10 years ago with just a baby, this mother. Well, I wasn't married at the time, but look at me now. My child is already 8 years old. Just at this moment, Wang Ping mercilessly pushed over the door. He looked at the young woman and silently sat down. Seeing that the young woman was about to continue speaking, Wang Ping shouted, "Dad, I'm hungry." Wang Lin sighed a breath of relief and said, "Let's stop this conversation here." The young woman let out a sigh and shook her head. "If you are not willing, there is no need to force it. But Brother Wang, if you fancy anyone, you have to remember to tell me." She looked at Wang Ping and reached out her hand to rub Wang Ping's head. Wang Ping grunted and dodged backwards. The young woman laughed. "This child has such a big temper. You should learn your father. Your father has the most gentle temper in the village. Why else do you think all these beautiful girls want to marry him?" With that, she turned around and left. After the young woman left, Wang Ping asked, "Dad, you?" Without waiting for him to finish speaking, Wang Lin smiled and said, "Children shouldn't worry about these things. Your Auntie Zhong is doing this with good intent. Come here and take your medicine." Wang Ping's eyes widened as he looked at this father and pouted. But she wants to find Pinger a stepmother. Ahuzi's father found Ahuzi a stepmother. As a result, Ahuzi doesn't get enough to eat every day and always gets scolded. Wang Lin laughed, then he rubbed Wang Ping's head and smiled. "Okay, I promise you I won't find you a stepmother, all right? Now take your medicine." Wang Lin happily picked up the bowl and drank all the medicine in one gulp. This time the medicine didn't taste bitter, instead, there was a hint of dry sweetness. This sweetness came from his heart, from his love for his father. "Dad, with Pinger accompanying you, you won't be lonely. Wait for Pinger to grow up and I'll serve you until you're old." Wang Ping put down his bowl and earnestly looked at Wang Lin. Wang Lin smiled and patted Wang Ping's head. He walked out of the room into the courtyard and began to clear the snow with a broom. Once he finished clearing the courtyard, he picked up his tools and began doing his carpentry work. Wang Ping watched his father through the window and silently pondered. His memory was very good, far better than that of other children of the same age. He clearly remembered when he accidentally asked his father where his mother was back when he was 4 years old. At that moment, his father's expression was very strange. He didn't understood what that expression was, but now that he had grown up, he did. That was a downcast expression. He was a sensible child, so from then on, he never asked about his mother again. After winter came, heavy snowstorms came one after another. As the cold winter arrived, the people of the village became less active. The cold winter days passed day by day, and soon the spring breeze came. It gradually swept away the coldness of winter. The village's school opened in the spring. The children of the village learned to read and write there. The days calmly passed like this. They were calm like water without any ripples. Among the calmness, a hint of tenderness washed Wang Lin's tired heart. As Wang Ping grew up day by day, Wang Lin no longer persistently pursued enlightenment but silently watched Wang Ping with the heart of a father. During these 10 years, except for when he was expelling Wang Ping's resentment, he didn't use any other spells. It was as if he had forgotten about everything. However, as he forgot everything, comprehension of the life and death cycle silently formed in Wang Lin's heart. As Wang Ping grew, it became more profound. Wang Lin had a very profound understanding of the death part of the life and death cycle, but he didn't have much comprehension of life. As time passed and as his Tao heart relieved its exhaustion, it was also slowly moving toward completion. After a perfect life and death, the karma cycle would be next. Wang Lin's Tao slowly evolved in this peaceful life. If a powerful cultivator saw this kind of change, they would be shocked because this was not a simple change but a huge change in one's domain. A domain was a special comprehension that cultivators had after the celestial realms shattered. It could be said that the Tao a cultivator walked was formed from their domain. The root of all of this was very deeply related to domain. Therefore, each domain was almost fixed for every cultivator, and it was very rare for a domain to evolve. The reason Liu Mai had caught the attention of the Huan family's ancestor was because her domain showed signs of evolving. This caused the Huan family's ancestor to willingly give up looking for the heaven-defying bead and quickly bring Liu Mai back to the Huan family. The root cause of all of this, aside from wanting to devour her domain, was that he was afraid someone like her would be stolen by someone else. Wang Lin was currently walking down this road. However, because he lacked comprehension in the life part of his life and death domain, even though he had shown signs of evolving into the karma domain, his domain hadn't evolved yet. As a result, the present was a key moment in Wang Lin's life. It could even determine his future achievements. Wang Lin kind of understood this matter. However, if he had a choice, he would never pay this price for this opportunity that all other cultivators dreamed of. Spring passed and autumn came, and another 6 years passed. Sun Tai's time arrived. It seemed to have come a bit earlier than expected. When he was lying in his own house, the people that were there to send him off were only Wang Lin and Wang Ping. At this moment, he was like the withered leaves that were blown away by the big snowstorm 6 years ago. Wang Ping was already 16 years old, and he had started to look more and more like Liu Mai. This kind of appearance on a boy made him exceptionally handsome. However, his eyes were pure and showed a clear distinction between black and white. During his 16 years of growth, he came to understand a lot of things. Things like the fact that Grandpa's son knew his father from a long time ago and respected his father a lot. This respect was never shown through how they talked or on the surface, it came from the bones, and Wang Ping could clearly feel it. Wang Lin appeared even older now. He calmly looked at Sun Tai and slowly said, "Sun Tai, I'll do what I promised you back then. Nothing in this world could escape life and death." Sun Tai looked at the father and son before him and revealed a smile. At this moment, he looked peaceful as he burned the last of his life. After hearing Wang Lin's promise, Sun Tai gave Wang Lin a profound look. He deeply ingrained the look of the person he once had a feud with. His eyes blurred and he suddenly felt like he had returned back to several hundred years ago, back in the Rain Celestial realm. Various scenes flashed through his eyes before they finally stopped at the calm yet slightly older face before him. The distance between life and death was, in fact, this short. Sun Tai smiled and closed his eyes. At this moment, the deathly aura on his body reached its peak and completely vanished the next instant. Grandpa's son, Wang Ping, shed tears as he looked at Sun Tai's serene face and began to cry. Wang Lin let out a sigh and rubbed Wang Ping's head. His eyes were calm. He had seen through life and death, seen through reincarnation. Such things were like smoke to him. He had seen them, but they wouldn't linger in his heart. Sun Tai's tomb was in the back of the Fallen Moon village. Everyone who died at the village would be buried there. Wang Ping carved the tomb, and on it he wrote, "Sun Tai's tomb inscribed by his grandson Wang Ping." When Wang Ping was 12, Sun Tai adopted Wang Ping as his step-grandson. Wang Lin didn't stop him. Sun Tai was, after all, older than Wang Lin and was old enough to be Wang Ping's grandpa. As for the relationship between him and Sun Tai, they were peers. Sun Tai even had a bone-deep respect for Wang Lin, just like Wang Ping felt. Sun Tai's tomb didn't have a body. This body had already become a jar of ashes inside Wang Lin's bag of holding. This was Wang Lin's promise to Sun Tai. The 16-year-old Wang Ping was even more handsome. In comparison to him, Wang Lin looked even older. The passage of time took away Wang Lin's appearance, and along with it went the interest of the village's women in matchmaking for him. However, as Wang Ping grew older, that interest was placed on him. However, Wang Ping was quite like his father. Although he was handsome, he always acted extremely calm. Normally, he didn't say much, but there was a hint of wisdom in his eyes. 1 year after Sun Tai died, Wang Lin was in the courtyard, holding a block of wood and carefully carving. Wang Ping was sitting on the side, calmly looking at this father. His father's face had even more wrinkles and had become even more ancient. Wang Lin didn't raise his head and calmly said, "Carving requires one to put their heart into every stroke. Every stroke needs to be engraved in one's memory. Only then can one be considered a craftsman." Wang Ping nodded. He also picked up a piece of wood and began to carefully carve. Under the sunset, the father's and son's shadows was pulled extremely long. There wasn't much difference in their movements, and even their demeanors were very similar. As the sun set, the figures gradually faded, but the hint of charm seemed to remain eternal. After the sun finally set and darkness covered the earth, Wang Lin lit up the lamp in the courtyard and calmly asked, "Did you finish thinking?" Wang Ping put down the half-finished statue and began to silently ponder. Wang Lin didn't urge him but sat down on the side and picked up Wang Ping's statue to examine it. This statue was slightly rough, but it was able to capture 30% of the charm. The statue was of Sun Tai. He had an arrogant expression as he looked up at the sky. His hands were forming a seal and a strange aura had gathered on his body. There were clouds under his feet, making him look like a legendary figure. Wang Ping lowered his head and whispered, "Dad, why won't you let me study the immortal spells Grandpa Sun left behind?" Wang Lin let out a sigh. In the end, Sun Tai still didn't respect his decision on this matter. He had used the fact that he had accepted Wang Ping as his adopted grandson to secretly impart cultivation techniques on him. None of this was hidden from Wang Lin. If it wasn't for Sun Tai trying to impart his cultivation method to Wang Ping, he wouldn't have died 4 years earlier than expected. As a father, Wang Lin wasn't a father to act without consulting others. He looked at Wang Ping. This child had inherited his mother's appearance, but during these 16 years, he had learned his calmness. When Wang Ping's eyes shined with wisdom, Wang Lin felt like he was seeing another version of himself. Wang Lin withdrew his gaze and softly said, "Because the life of a cultivator doesn't suit you." Wang Ping revealed a faint smile as he looked up at his father and said, "Dad, I never cultivated those cultivation methods Grandpa Sun gave me, not even once." Wang Lin nodded. He naturally knew all of this. Although Sun Tai had passed on his cultivation methods, in the end, Wang Ping never cultivated them. Wang Ping lowered his head and asked, "Dad, you are immortal too, right?" Wang Lin's eyes revealed vicissitude and he slowly said, "Not an immortal, just a cultivator." Wang Ping silently pondered for a moment and asked, "Dad, do you want me to live an ordinary life and not follow your footsteps in becoming a cultivator?" The moon gradually rose into the sky. When the moonlight fell on the earth, there was a hint of coldness within its gentle light. The gentle breeze caused the lamp to sway back and forth. The fire inside the lamp began to flicker and mix with the moonlight that enveloped the courtyard. Wang Lin put down Wang Ping's statue. He looked up at the sky, and his voice was erratic. "Yes. If Pinger is unwilling," Wang Ping raised his head and looked up at his father. This was the first time in 16 years that he had spoken like this to his father. Wang Lin's gaze fell on Wang Ping. He didn't speak but calmly looked at Wang Ping. Time slowly passed by. Wang Ping gradually lowered his head as if he was afraid to look at Wang Lin's eyes. "The cultivator's life is not suited for you. Don't mention it again." Wang Lin's voice was very soft but firm. However, hidden in his eyes, where Wang Ping couldn't see, was a trace of sadness. This sadness was very strong. Wang Ping bitterly said, "Yes, father, I won't cultivate." Wang Lin didn't speak as he turned around and entered the room. At the moment he entered the room, his voice came. "Ping, eat your medicine." Wang Ping silently pondered. After a long time, he let out a sigh, got up, and walked into the room. His back looked crestfallen. His father didn't reveal his majesty, but in Wang Ping's heart, it was immeasurably huge and he was powerless to resist. He could only follow his father's will and live out an ordinary life. "Aside from cultivation, I can give you everything else in the world." After Wang Ping drank his medicine and lied down, Wang Lin's voice slowly drifted over. Wang Ping closed his eyes and didn't speak. In the darkness, Wang Lin sat by himself in the courtyard, staring at the darkness before him. Sadness flashed across his eyes once more. The passage of time was like the moonlight in the darkness. You can't see when it will come, and when you do see it, the moonlight has already landed on the ground. In the blink of an eye, it had been 3 years since Sun Tai died. This year Wang Ping was 19 years old. He had completely become a handsome young man. Although there was still a hint of immaturity on his face, unless one looked closely, it was very difficult to see. His appearance became more and more like Liu Mai's. In contrast, Wang Lin became even older. 19 years of time had left deep marks on his face. On the 19th year after Wang Lin arrived at the Fallen Moon village, he packed up his things and left with Wang Ping. When they left, Wang Ping's childhood friends all came to send them off. Most of them were girls, and their gazes toward Wang Ping were filled with resentment. The eyes of the second daughter from the Zhu family were especially resentful. However, Wang Ping was completely indifferent to all of this. He inherited his appearance from Liu Mai, but he inherited his personality from Wang Lin. He didn't care too much about women. During these 19 years of time, people in the village gave birth and died, a generation was growing old while a new generation was growing up. Compared to when Wang Lin arrived here 19 years ago, 3 or 4 people out of 10 had passed away. The burly man from the Zhu family was still sturdy, but he was obviously not young anymore. He stood beside Wang Lin and sadly said, "Brother Wang, in the blink of an eye, almost 20 years have passed. I still remember you arriving at the village with Ping Er, but now you are going to leave." Wang Lin faintly smiled and softly said, "Brother Zhu, I have been troubling you all these years. However, now that the child has grown up, I need to take him out to see the world." The burly man from the Zhu family sighed as his gaze fell on Wang Ping, who was surrounded by the girls in the village, and wryly smiled. "It looks like my family's second daughter won't have the luck." Wang Lin shook his head and smiled. "It should be my boy who doesn't have the luck." Not far away, Wang Ping's expression was normal as he softly said, "All of you, take care." With that, he returned to Wang Lin. However, one of the girls ran out with a red face and shouted, "Wang Ping, you! Will you return in the future?" Wang Ping stopped. Without turning around, he softly said, "I probably won't." The girl's eyes turned red and 2 streams of tears fell down her face. She seemed to have heard her own heart shatter. "I hate you, Wang Ping." The girl began to cry and ran away. Wang Ping frowned as he arrived next to his father and remained silent. The burly man from the Zhu family let out a sigh. He clasped his hands at Wang Lin and said, "Brother Wang, take care." Wang Lin had a very good opinion of this straightforward man, and he laughed. "Take care." After that, he turned around and walked away. Wang Ping followed a few steps behind before hesitating. He looked back at the girl who was running away and crying, then he let out a sigh and left with Wang Lin. Wang Ping caught up to his father and frowned. "Dad, why are those girls so troublesome? Especially that Zhu Ruotong." Wang Lin laughed as he looked back at Wang Ping. Having inherited Liu Mai's appearance, there was something demonic about Wang Ping's handsomeness. Wang Lin said, with a smile that was not a smile, "You don't like the girl from the Zhu family?" Wang Ping sighed. "I don't like her. It's just that, when she was crying, I felt a bit of reluctance in my heart." Although water covered most of planet Renyun, there were still a lot of mountains and land. Although the catastrophe years ago made the spiritual energy on the planet a lot weaker, it was still slightly better than planet Suzaku. The figures of a father or son always be seen between the famous mountains on planet Renyun. They were climbing the mountains and standing on the top of the world. They were watching the changes of the earth and the overlapping clouds. The earth had shrunken down a lot, it was as if they could see the end with but a gaze. When they were at the peak, the wind was whistling in their ears. Wang Ping stood at the peak, looking down at the world. It was as if his soul had evolved. As they climbed mountain after mountain, his weak body gradually gained strength. In his eyes, everything about his father was great, whether it was the 19 years of peace, or their current challenge against the world. After crossing peak after peak, Wang Ping's mind expanded greatly. It was as if he had forgotten everything wandering the world. Although the only person accompanying him was his father, the mountains, the water, the sky, and this land seemed to be able to feel his presence and followed him. There wasn't any sense of loneliness, only a freedom of spirit. No matter how dangerous the mountain was, it couldn't stop this father and son duo. No matter how big a mountain was, they all fell under their feet. Although Wang Ping's body was immortal, his heart was molded again and again until it reached a new height. To experience life through the mountains, to calm one's mind through crossing them, and to feel might from crossing over each mountain. However, he should never stop or yield to this might, so he continued to climb over each mountain he faced. He used the body of a mortal to inherit Wang Lin's heaven-defying ideals. Wang Lin didn't impart Wang Ping any cultivation methods, but he used his own method to help refine Wang Ping's mind. Thirsty? Drink some spring water. Hungry? Eat some fruits and wild beasts. Tired? Rest on the ground. Sleepy? Lie down on the earth and the sky will be your blanket. 3 years of time quickly flashed by. During these 3 years, Wang Ping's respect for his father grew even stronger. In his eyes, his father was the most amazing person in the world. After conquering the mountains, the rivers were next. The shadow of this father and son duo would appear across rivers everywhere. They looked at the majestic rivers and listened to the almost heaven-defying roars of the water. A solitary boat held Wang Ping's gaze and gradually evolving mind. As it crossed the river, it continued to push forward and challenge the raging waves. Wang Lin and Wang Ping left their shadows everywhere across this large river that went around most of planet Renyun. More laughter came from Wang Ping's mouth, and accompanying this laughter was Wang Lin's hearty laughter. This kind of laughter was very rare from Wang Lin. His laughter seemed contagious and made Wang Ping even happier. It was as if as long as his father was by his side, everything would be all right. Father, I will spend my life accompanying you. Even in death, if there is reincarnation, even if we are no longer father and son, I'll never forget you. In the river, Wang Ping's voice was very determined. This solitary boat traveled down the river across more than half of planet Renyun and headed toward the ocean. The journey on land was over, but the voyage over the sea had just begun. As the ship sailed through the ocean breeze, Wang Ping's world expanded indefinitely. Islands and waves passed by one. He saw heavenly lightning strike down on the surface of the water. He saw a huge whale the size of a village. He even saw a mirage. The sea's vastness was far greater than land. Wang Ping felt that the vastness of the sea was like his father, it seemed to stretch on forever. After integrating with the boundlessness of the sea, the fierceness of the mountain, and the endless extension of the river, he was able to feel the might of the world. When Wang Lin and Wang Ping returned to land 5 years later, Wang Ping had been reborn. Although he was still a mortal, his soul accommodated the world. When they returned, the last mountain they crossed was Quillian Mountain next to Fallen Moon Village. The childish nature was completely gone from the 27-year-old Wang Ping's face. Instead, his eyes were filled with determination. During these 8 years of travel, the hint of demonic nature gradually disappeared and was replaced with absolute handsomeness. This sharp and handsome face contained a smile as bright as the sun and even brighter eyes. Looking at Wang Ping, Wang Lin revealed a smile. This journey was a method that Wang Lin had been thinking of for a long time to help Wang Ping completely expel the resentment in his body. Liu Mai's pill and Wang Lin's spell could only eliminate a majority of the resentment, as the resentment was too integrated with his soul. Throughout the 20 years of peace, the resentment gradually eased, and the 8 years of soul evolution allowed Wang Ping to purify his soul. Unknowingly, Wang Ping gradually removed the resentment in his soul until there was only a sliver remaining. This silver was something that no pill or spell could remove. It could only be erased through the reincarnation cycle. Under Quillian Peak, Wang Lin looked at the mountain village far away and asked, "Don't you want to look?" Beside him, Wang Ping shook his head and said, "Not going." Wang Lin didn't speak anymore and stepped toward the mountain's peak. Wang Ping chased after his father and laughed. "Father, back when I was a child, I once heard people say that Quillian Peak has celestial clouds. They said that just sucking one mouthful would make me immune to sickness for 10 years. I have always wondered when Father would bring me here." Wang Lin faintly smiled and gently looked at Wang Ping. This father and son duo gradually reached the peak of this tall Quillian mountain. Countless clouds floated at the peak, it was as if they were stepping on the clouds. Wang Ping took a deep breath and then looked at his father. Although Quillian Mountain was huge, it couldn't compare to this father. Although Quillian Mountain was tall, it couldn't compare to his father. The cloud in the distance seemed to darken, and there were bursts of lightning and rumbling thunder coming from it. This power of the heavens and earth attracted Wang Ping's gaze. Not long after, the thunder grew louder. A wet wind blew by, followed by rain. As the dark cloud began to spread, the rain began to get heavier. Because it hadn't rained for a long time, the dust on the earth began to float into the air. However, before it flew up too high, it rapidly merged with the falling rain and returned to the earth once more. The dust was just like heaven-defying cultivators that desired to reach the heavens but were put down by the rain. Just like cultivators, how many specks of dust could actually ascend to the heavens? The thunder and rain passed by. The father and son on the mountain peak calmly watched it all. This rain seemed to fall everywhere, but none of it landed on their bodies. Aside from the rumbling thunder and swishing rain, there was no other sound. The thunder and rain came fast and left just as fast. Soon, the cloud dissipated and a rainbow that looked like it was hanging from the sky appeared before the father and son duo. The rainbow was beautiful and colorful. The 7 colors in such close proximity seemed to contain a hint of the heavens Tao. However, at this moment, this quietness was disturbed by a whistling sound. From a distance, a flying sword whistled by with a thunderous boom, as if it was going to shatter the rainbow when it flew through it. A middle-aged man was standing inside the sword light. This person had the air of a celestial as he stood on the green flying sword that gave off a cold glint. As he flew by, he immediately spotted Wang Lin and Wang Ping at the top of Qilin Peak and was surprised. For a mortal to climb up here was not normal, it required great determination. He revealed a look of admiration but didn't stop. He flew over the mountain and headed into the distance. Wang Ping stared at the middle-aged man until he disappeared over the horizon. This was the first time Wang Ping had seen something like this. This shocked his heart greatly, and he couldn't calm down for a long time. Wang Ping murmured, "Father, is that an immortal?" Wang Lin sighed and slowly said, "Yes." Wang Ping pondered for a long time before he raised his head. He then looked at his father with his bright eyes and softly said, "Father, can I really not cultivate?" Wang Lin's gaze fell on the gradually dissipating rainbow. Deep within his eyes, he revealed a hint of sadness. He didn't speak and only shook his head. Wang Ping didn't speak anymore but stared at where the middle-aged man disappeared. After leaving Qilin Peak, Wang Ping was completely silent. They walked on the main road into a town before taking a carriage toward the big city. Along the way, Wang Ping didn't say a word. Aside from the coachman, there was only Wang Lin and Wang Ping. Wang Lin looked outside, and in his eyes, the sadness became even stronger and there was a hint of unspeakable bitterness. The carriage was completely quiet for a long time. Wang Ping lowered his head and whispered, "Father, I want to cultivate." This was the second time he said he wanted to cultivate. The first time was when 10 years ago, that year he was 17 years old. Wang Lin didn't withdraw his gaze as he kept looking outside and calmly said, "You are not suited for cultivation." Wang Ping looked at this father's silhouette and unwillingly asked, "Father, why?" Wang Lin turned his head. Like 10 years ago, he didn't speak, he only calmly looked at Wang Ping. The sound of the wagon's wheels rolling over things slowly came from the outside and replaced the passage of time. Finally, Wang Ping lowered his head and whispered, "I understand, Father." This video will end here.